right, welcome everybody. This is the Askew Creek Author Talk, and we are authors from the Askew Creek Bookshop in the Chemainus Public Market here on Vancouver Island. We have 40 authors, all of whom have written, sweated, and pored over at least one book, sometimes many, to bring their readers the best possible novel, memoir, poetry, short story collection, or nonfiction book that they possibly can. And today we're talking to Amanda Hale. And I will say Amanda has not great bandwidth. So if she freezes, that's what's going on, but we will keep going even if we can't see you moving, Amanda.
Okay.
So for our viewers today, if you're watching this on YouTube, please click like and subscribe and hit the notification button. And then that way you won't miss any of our author talks. So, Amanda, let's start off talking about you and your writing kind of in general. Are you a Vancouver Island native?
I'm not a native of Vancouver Island. I moved out here from Toronto just over 30 years ago. And I moved to Hornby Island, and I've been here all that time. But in the last 15 years or so, until COVID happened, I was going back and spending about half the year in Toronto because I have a lot of work connections there. But of course, now I'm here all the time, can't go anywhere. But that's fine with me.
Okay. So Vancouver Island is kind of a hotbed for writers. What do you think draws writers to the island?
Well, I was drawn here at the time. I had gone from writing to visual art, and I'm quite an urban person. And I found in Toronto and Montreal that I was getting very much caught up in political activism and solidarity work, and I wasn't getting enough creative time. So I wanted to move somewhere rural. And I knew people here on Hornby Island. So what drew me was to have, more solitude, because obviously as a writer, you need lots of time alone to think and to write. So I think probably that, that's why it is a hotbed, because people come to the islands for the peace and quiet and the nature. So, you can really focus and think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very good environment for writing, because in the city, there's so many distractions. When I'm in Toronto, I'm out every night. There's so much entertainment, or there was. I'm sure there's not now. But here, of course, there's a lot of choices, but I do spend more time at home, just my garden, my house. I'm on a half acre. So it's ideal for writing, and for being very meditative.
Yeah, Hornby Island is beautiful. It's certainly a lovely place to sit and write.
Yeah, indeed.
So has the location affected how you write or what you write about?
At first it didn't, but because I have lots of ideas and I've traveled a lot, so I do write about a lot of different places. But during the time that I've been living here, I've gotten to know the place a lot better, and I have found that I started wanting to write about the island, and we have the herring festival every year when there's the herring spawn, which is a marvelous time, as you know. And so for the herring festival for the last couple of years, I have written a specific piece, and that did deal very much with my life here on the island. But other books, they're set in Cuba, in Guatemala, in wartime Britain, on Haida Gwaii. They can be anywhere. You can write anywhere, and you can write about anything in those, whatever place you're in. But the really grounded writing I did about Hornby, was specifically for that herring festival. And I've just had one of those pieces included in an anthology in Toronto. So I was really pleased about that.
Oh, congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So are you friends with other authors?
Yes, I have many friends around the world who are writers, but probably most important writers to me here are my writing group. because we have a group of 9 of us here on Hornby Island, and that actually writing has grown here quite a lot because Cornelia Hoogland teaches. She leads classes in writing, all different genres of writing. Wendy Burton has done that, and years ago when I first came here, I was teaching creative writing too, a course called Writing from the Body. So that has encouraged a lot of people to form groups. I think there's a few groups going on here, but our group is 9 of us, and I mean, normally in non-COVID time we meet every month, you know, and we support each other with critiques and encouragement and so on. And some of that happens informally now by email, but it's not the same as all meeting together. Last summer, we were able to reform our group and meet outdoors, which we may do this summer. And it's very, very supportive and very important, I think, for a writer to have that, you know, variety of opinions about their writing, and to be able to support other writers too. So those people are very important to me. And then, you know, here in BC, there are quite a few writers, you know, that I do see under former circumstances. Kathy Page is one of them. She is at VIU, at Vancouver Island University, and she's had me there to speak to her class. And a former editor of mine, Joy Googler, has had me to speak to her class too. Kathy Page, you probably know of. She did a book called Dear Evelyn, and she won a number of prizes for it, the Rogers Trust Fiction, and I think it was the Giller, or one of the big prizes anyway. And in Victoria and Vancouver, I have writer friends, and I'm a member of the Writers Union since 2001 when I published my first novel. So normally we have AGM in person, you know, and then you get to see everybody and you network, and it's very important to network with other writers, because people will, you know, arrange a series of readings and then they'll invite you and then you invite them back, and there's a lot of cross fertilization within the writing community. It's a generous community.
Yes, I found the same thing. Writers are a very, very kind and generous bunch of people for the most part.
Yeah, indeed.
Have you, in your own readings, have you read anything that has made you think differently about fiction?
Well, some of my early influences in writing was Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter, because I started out doing drama, studied at Concordia and got an MA in creative writing drama. So those were early influences. And Samuel Beckett, you know, is very, very spare and very specific. So he was a strong influence on me. But I think later on, I became very influenced by W.G. Sebald, a German writer who was teaching in England. And I think because of his, the way that he writes, it's kind of mixing up all the genres. It's impossible to put a label on him, you know, because really bookstores always want to know, you know, what genre is this? Because they want to know where to place it on the shelves. But Sebald and many other writers these days are writing outside the box and mixing up memoir, you know, with history and, you know, and with research and with poetry. And with Sebald, he also uses a lot of little blurry black and white photographic images. So you know, that's very intriguing to me. And I have been influenced by people that towards the direction of creative nonfiction. That's something that I feel very comfortable to write in. And I don't really like to be boxed into a certain genre. You know, I am, of course, because I'm basically a novelist, but I do many other kinds of writing. Yeah, lots of influences out there. And who I've been most recently reading is Maggie O'Farrell. She wrote a marvelous book, Hamnet and Judith, about Shakespeare's wife and the twins that they had, and how he came to write Hamlet. She's a marvelous writer. She's Irish background, but lives in Britain, and has written many wonderful books. And there's a memoir of hers called I Am, which I just started reading, which is, again, very intriguing.
Yes,
Mm.
sounds like it.
Mm.
Were there any books that you particularly liked as a child that may have had some influence on you later on?
Well, I was very sad as a child because we had a difficult family, and my father was missing. The book that I remember reading over and over was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell, and
Mm-hmm.
or Sewell, I don't know. And it's a terribly sad book, but I think I was drawn quite early to sad topics, which I'm actually very comfortable with because it's familiar to me. And we did have a difficult time in our family, so that's the one I remember. But there were many books that I read,
Mm-hmm.
earlier books, and then my grandmother was very fond of those sort of historical bodice ripper novels, and she would hand them on to me, and then my mother would say, "You shouldn't be reading that." And I do actually write quite a lot of historical novels, or I'll have a historical subplot in a book. So, I think the historical imaginative fiction appealed to me, perhaps because of that.
Mm-hmm. I was
Mm.
very, very fond of Black Beauty as well.
Oh, you were? Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, it started my love for horses, which has lasted my whole
Yes.
life. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, if you could tell your younger writing self anything today, what would it be?
Oh, I would say be bold, take risks, speak out, because I always wanted to write, but it was years before I did. I went to university as a mature student in my later 20s, because I somehow um, had this addiction to perfection, and I didn't want to try anything unless I could be perfect at it. And of course, with writing, you have to write for many years and I'm still learning. You never stop learning. So, yeah, I would encourage young writers just to be bold and to just write whatever comes out, and you don't have to share it. That's something I always said in my creative writing class, just write and just keep your pen moving, because we would do with a
Mhm.
pen and paper, and then you can either share it with the class or you cannot. There's no risk here because maybe nobody's ever going to see it, and invariably people want to share because you put something down on paper, and the more spontaneous it is, the better. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you would edit out, but you've usually got a core of something wonderful. So I would just say be daring and bold, and don't be afraid of what you're going to put down on the paper or into the computer.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very good advice.
Hmm.
Let's talk about your book now. What's the title and what is the genre?
Well, it's my latest novel, and it's called Madhatter. And it has sometimes been seen more as a fictionalized memoir, because it is actually a fictionalized account of the experience of my own family during World War II. So I chose to write it as a novel because, obviously I'm a novel writer. Um, it gives me a lot more freedom to imagine things, the connective tissue that you don't always know from research. And also it protects my family. I've
Mm-hmm.
given people different names, but it's basically about the facts of our growing up and what happened to my father, because my father was a follower of Oswald Mosley, who started the British Union of Fascists at a
Mm-hmm.
time when that was perfectly respectable. But when war broke out, fascism, that word gained a whole different kind of energy around it. And, after the war, of course, everything was different. So my father, because he continued as a supporter of Oswald Mosley, was interned for 3 years during the war. I was born right at the end of the war in 1944. And our father was quite broken by, his imprisonment and his interrogation and all his experiences. There were many people interned. It wasn't just the Mosleyites. It was there were German Jews who'd taken refuge in Britain. They were interned. Italian nationals, because Mussolini was a fascist, and anyone on the wrong side of the war. Once Churchill became prime minister, he had Rule 18b, under which he was allowed to intern anybody that was considered a threat to national security, which I can quite understand, because it's amazing that Britain was not invaded by the Germans. I don't know, how that didn't happen, but anyway, you can certainly understand the fear that people had. And so the novel focuses mostly on the family, because I call my father's named Christopher Brooke in the story. That's not the real name. And then Cynthia Brooke, his wife. It focuses on her, and she's got 3 children already. And she's a woman of privilege who's been used to having a housekeeper and a nanny and so on. But all the women have gone off to join the war effort. And she hires this young woman from Ireland called Mary Byrne. Now, Mary Byrne is the only really fictional character in the book. And she's one of those gifts to a writer. She just arrived, with so much to say, and so spontaneous, and a wonderfully rounded character. And she's everybody's favorite character, including mine. So she comes to work in the house. So mostly it's sort of a domestic drama, but we see very much the effect that the absence of the father has on the older children. And then there's the 4th one is born, which represents me, and then that child takes over as narrator, because Mary Byrne is the narrator during the first part of this 3-part book. She's a perfect outside eye, because she can just comment without prejudice on the family and say whatever it is that she sees. Right. So that's basically the story. And then, of course, there's the background of the war, because they have the radio on. You hear Churchill, giving news, and the broadcasts that came from Germany by William Joyce, who called himself Lord Haw-Haw. And we get people reading the newspaper and reporting on what's happening. Mary Byrne is talking about what's happening in Ireland, because she has a brother who's fighting with the British in Italy. She has a brother who's in the IRA. She's from a huge family. So it has a very broad sweep, the novel. It goes to all over the place and has many characters. And it's a long novel. It's over 400 pages. People say that they read it in a couple of days, because it's a page turner. So I've had a lot of success with it, and I've made an audiobook of it too, in my own voice, because I can do all those regional accents that they have in Britain, and the Irish accent and so on. I had drama school training as a young person in London. So I'm very pleased with the public response to Madhatter. You can imagine, that we were considered to be the family of a traitor, and without really understanding the cloud we were under as children, or certainly not me, because I was very small and I didn't really know my father. And he subsequently committed suicide when I was 11, but it meant nothing to me, because, I hadn't known him really. And he was very much rejected by the extended family and so on. Anyway, it's been very liberating for me not to write this book, but to present it to the public, and to find that people understand, are sympathetic, and are really interested, because people are very interested in war stories. And internment is a little known fact in Britain. Of course, we know about the Japanese internment here, and, various people have been interned in wars, but it was rather secret in Britain.
Right.
Yeah.
It sounds like that this book was quite cathartic for you.
Very much so. Yes, it was, and I think that's changed my writing in a way, because now I'm more willing to share, in a creative nonfiction memoir kind of way. And I find myself writing a lot more about personal things now, without trying to hide behind something or obscure it.
So when you are working on, I know that you have several books, and So are you hoping that each book will stand on its own, or is Madhatter connected to any other books that you've written?
Madhatter is not connected. Like each of my books usually is completely different. Like my first one is set on Haida Gwaii in 1915 on a whaling station. And then the second one is set in Guatemala about a girl that was adopted from Guatemala and goes back to search for her birth mother. The third one is in Toronto, but it's got a historical subplot in Italy with Andreas Vesalius, the so-called father of anatomy. I spent quite a bit of time in Cuba as well. And I have a couple of collections of short fiction set in Cuba, because when I was there, and I was trying to write about the war story, I found in Cuba I was completely unable to write about anything but Cuba. It's such a powerful place. So both those collections are they're like novels in a way, because they're collected. They're connected stories.
Right. So when you were working on this particular book, how many hours a day do you write? What's your process?
Well, when I started writing novels, because before that I was writing for theater when I was in Montreal and Toronto, and when I came here, then I was doing visual art. But when I came back to writing as a novelist, I would write 9 to 5, which I would just keep going. But in fact, that's too much, really. So yes, I used to write, like a full day's work, 9 to 5. But now I find it's actually much more productive to write a shorter time. I do like to write in the morning because that's the best energy for me. But then by lunchtime, that's probably around 2 o'clock, I stop. And I think if you write for too many hours, it's just counterproductive, really, for me. Or maybe it's because I'm getting older and I don't have as much energy. I don't know, but I have more confidence now in, being able to write well in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I find when I write for shorter periods that it's much more focused.
Yes.
So when you were writing, obviously, because this novel is based on real people who were real in your life and your own experiences, were there any ethical dilemmas that you faced as you did this?
Well, I have to say that writing about family is quite risky. I didn't start this until my mother had died. My mother died in 2006, and I had started making notes for it before that. It's been a long time brewing, but I didn't have to worry about my parents. And my brother died also in 2000. But I have two older sisters, and the eldest sister still hasn't read the book. As soon as the book came out, both of them knew I was writing it, and we would talk about family memories and so on. But then I think my older sister became very uneasy about it because she was the one who remembered our father really well, and she was probably afraid of what I was going to write. So she hasn't read it, but my other sister, she said, well, I'm going to put this aside until the right moment. So she was afraid too. And she told me after she did read it, she said, I was so afraid all the time I was reading it because I didn't know what was going to come next, which I can understand because I'm the one who's made that decision and, I'm using them as characters. But for myself, the ethics of it are that you do everything from a place of love and a very positive attitude, because, I wouldn't want to be writing about something negative because you live with it for years and you're editing and, it takes many years for a book to come to fruition. It does for me anyway. So and I've written about real characters as well sometimes. Well, in the Guatemalan book, Hernando Cortez and the conquest of the Aztecs. I mean, he is in the subplot, and he's a difficult character to be sympathetic to. But I found a place of understanding him too, and writing in a positive way about even people that are reviled through history. But certainly in a family book, I think you have to be very compassionate, and you have to understand everybody. And if they're doing something that could be open to judgment, you have to understand why they're doing that, and write in a way that is not entirely sympathetic, but that is not negative, and that is not going to hurt anybody. So that for me is the ethics of it. And certainly with Madhatter, people have said that it is it's a sympathetic view without being one that just pardons everything. Obviously, my father was open to a lot of judgment, but that's not why I wrote it. And I didn't write it to vindicate him either. I just wrote it because this is a story, and readers can judge for themselves. You don't want to be trying to tell the reader what to think, do you?
No.
People like to make their own assessment of everything. But I know there have been some family stories that have been written, that come from a place of being wounded by a parent, say, and who wants to read that? Not me.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on our time. Is there anything else that you'd like your readers to know about? Well, just an interesting thing about how I became a novelist. I never intended to write a novel, but I went to Haida Gwaii back in 2000 and what was it? 2006, I think. I went to Haida Gwaii. No, 1996. I went there because I have a friend who lives at Rose Harbor, which was a whaling station, and it's a haunted place. And, I just started writing when I was there, but thinking it was just journal writing. But by the end of that was a summer, where I just went in my pickup truck and drove all the way up to through the Yukon and to Alaska. And by the time I got home, I was gone 10 weeks. By the time I came home, I had a full notebook about Rose Harbor, because it was almost like channeling. There were voices there, because in that whaling station, there were Chinese and Japanese workers who, had a brutal life there. They'd come to earn a living here on Gold Mountain, and faced a terrible life, and probably never went back to their countries. So that's how I started. When I came home, I realized, I think I'm writing a novel, so it came from there. So it was interesting too, because right now I'm involved with an opera, writing the libretto for an opera, which premiered in Toronto 2 years ago. And now it's going to be produced by the Canadian Opera Company in Toronto, and then tour to Vancouver next year, we hope, if we're allowed public performance. But that's something else. I never intended to write a libretto. I wrote a book of poems when I went to Pompeii, and from that grew gradually over many years this opera. So it's an interesting thing about just being spontaneous and being guided by your instincts, and not always having the actual intention to do something, but realizing, this is what I'm doing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Amanda, for talking with us today. And if anybody out there would like to go and find Amanda's book, it is at the Chemainus Public Market in the Askew Creek Bookshop, as well as a couple of your other books. And I believe you have an audio book there too. Is that correct?
There is an audio book, yes, but that audio book now is available digitally at audible.com. But if anybody wants CDs, there's The Reddening Path is available in CDs at the Askew Creek Bookshop. And if anyone wants to see my webpage, it's amandahale.com, and you can see lots of information about all my books there. Thank you, Diane, so much.
Oh, no problem. And I'll put a link to your website in the the description part underneath the video on YouTube. So,
Mm.
so everybody can just click on the link and go see Amanda's website.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you too. All right. Good night.